Good morning. Well, it is here anyway. It's October, middle of October, and it's still very nice out there. Today, let me talk about my Leica M10, why this really has now become pretty much my favourite camera, and how I've finally managed, it's been a struggle, but how I've finally managed to make this my constant companion. If I'm not doing the wedding, then that's what I take out with me. For all my street photography, I do a little bit of sort of countryside photography, um, portraits, occasional boudoir shoot and that sort of thing. That's what I use. Weddings, I take it to me with weddings, and I'll show you a couple of shots now that I took at my last wedding a couple of days ago with this, because it just works. It just gives images which, I don't know, they've just got something about them. I'm not going to go into technical details and all that sort of thing about micro contrast and colours, and they are just more artistic than I get from my Nikons, which in turn are a million times more artistic than I used to get from my Sonys. So why? Why after, if you've watched my previous videos, and if you haven't, if you click subscribe, go back through the previous videos, you'll see that I've had a bit of a struggle becoming, falling in love with my Leica M10. But I'm glad I persevered, because it's made me change. Okay, at weddings, I'm still the same guy I've been for 10 years. But outside weddings, I'm a lot different to what I used to be, say, 9 months ago, even maybe a bit more than that, 18 months ago. It's made me change, and change for the better. Because what the Leica does is it makes you think much more about what you're photographing, about how you're photographing it. My typical way of taking a street photo 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, whatever, was with a Leica, or more possibly a Sony. Go out, see something, click, move on. I've been on several workshops held by other street photographers, both locally and down in London, both in groups and one-to-ones, and it seems to be very much a case of, right, we'll walk from here to there, and when we get there, we're going to photograph that, click, now we move on. And that seemed to be the way that it's done. But I have now found my way of doing this stuff, and it's much more creative. I try and find a bit here and a bit there, and a reflection here and something there, and wait for someone to walk past. And I kind of want to put all that together. And I was out a few days ago, and one particular place, I stood there for, I must have been there for at least 4 or 5 minutes. Just first of all waiting for the light, because it was a cloudy day. We had sunshine, cloud, sunshine, cloud. So I waited for the sun to come back out. Then I had to wait for someone to be in the right place, in exactly the right place, walking in the right direction. And all of that time, all of that kind of creative process, for me, I think creates a better image. It's not images that jump out. You don't see light and shadow and think, oh, if someone walks past there, I'll get a shot of that. They're walking past there, right, click that, right, that's done, let's move on. Much more putting parts of a jigsaw together, looking for distinct different colours, shade, light, shapes, and so on. And I don't think I would have got that creative had I not got this. So very briefly, the way I use this, I've got the EVF, and the reason I've got the EVF is, well, two things. Firstly, exposure, actually, rather than focusing. You might think I've only got it because of focusing. If you use live view on an M10, you can use matrix metering. If you use spot metering, which is what the only option you've got if you're using a rangefinder, you've only got to move that spot a tiny bit. And if you're going from light to dark, it's going to vastly change the exposure, which then means you're down to using manual exposure, which then slows you down even more. And sometimes you just don't, it's not necessary. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. It's just a nuisance. So if you can use matrix metering, then just moving the camera a little bit isn't going to be such a big effect on the exposure. And it's close enough that I can live with it being slightly out by, plus or minus one stop. But I wear glasses, so if I'm using the EVF, the screen, I've got to put the screen up. And I just don't like using a camera like that. I like to look through a viewfinder. That's because you can put it against your head. You can get something solid there. Keep it still. So the EVF allows me to do that. So it's the exposure that is the main thing. But also, of course, focusing. If I'm using an adapted lens, and I've just, by the way, I've just got this lovely Nikon 105 2.5 AI lens, I think from about early 1980s, in reasonably good condition outside, glass and optics wise absolutely perfect, which is a lens which I'm working at using for street photography. And you're thinking 105 for street photography, shouldn't it be a 35? Well, possibly, but I'm experimenting with it, and so far I'm loving it. But I'll do some more videos actually out on the street using that lens in the coming couple of weeks. So if you're using adapted lenses, obviously the rangefinder mechanism, focusing mechanism doesn't work, so you need to use the EVF. But also sometimes using the EVF on a Leica or an M mount lens, I still find easier than using the rangefinder. I do switch between the two, I have to say. And one instance, let me just mention, where the EVF focusing isn't very helpful is if you're shooting at small aperture, if you're using an f8, f11, which a lot of the time for street photography I would be, then the EVF focusing is going to put focus peaking on a huge amount of what you see through the viewfinder. Whereas if you're shooting a 1.4 or something like that, there's a very small amount that's got focus peaking on, so you know that's the bit in focus. Once you go up to f8, f11, a great deal of the shot has got red focusing on, red peaking on. So what's actually in focus? So in those situations, if I'm concerned about having a particular part of the image in focus, then I simply resort back to the rangefinder, use the rangefinder to know that I've got focus on that particular thing. And that's much better than the EVF. So a combination of the two is actually really, really good, which kind of brings me on to the M11V, the rumoured M11 with an EVF, not a rangefinder viewfinder. Whilst it sounds really nice, and I love the idea of having some internal memory, being able to switch between 60, 30 and 18 megapixels, I think, and a few other things. I'm not sure that I actually want to completely give up the rangefinder. I'll have to wait and see what the specs are with the rumoured M11V and whether it actually turns out to be anything like what everyone is saying it's going to be. But I'll update you on that in the coming weeks when it's actually announced. So just a final mention, I've also, something I've done recently, he says, is start a new website. It's not a new website. It's not a new URL. It's alanblasdell.com, and I've had that for a couple of years now. But and I used a WordPress website, and I sold a few photos through there and did a few blogs and bits and bobs. Didn't ever spend much time on it because I didn't have this guy, and I did street photography. I've done for, I don't know, 10 years or something, but not to the extent I am now, because next year is going to be my last year of weddings. I'm looking to build up the SEO on a website to build up my portfolio and so on and so forth, to sell some prints, to do some teaching and do more videos. And that website will be where I do that. And I've changed from a WordPress website to a Wix website. It's only been there for a couple of weeks, way off being finished. But in future, I will be adding videos, teaching instructional videos. Yeah, I suppose instructional videos about Leica, and it will be much more dedicated to Leica. There'll be shots, there'll be workshops, and so on and so forth. And just my final thing for today is beware what straps you use and check your straps regularly. Doesn't apply to my Nikon stuff and all that, because on all of those I use a hook in the bottom, and I just hook into there, and the hook that clips in has got the screw on it, so it locks it in place. Never ever had a problem with one of those. But on the Leica I don't use that, and I've had this old strap for years and years and years, and it's still going strong. And it's got little twist on rings, and you just twist that onto the hook, the eyes on the Leica. And I was out a week ago walking through a country park which I haven't been to for a long time, and it fell off. And what I thought had happened is that the ring had worked its way through the leather there, and it must have pulled itself out. But anyway, as you can see, it hasn't. What happened, unbelievable, but what happened is that that twist on ring had completely untwisted itself and came off the eye on the camera. I cannot believe, how does that happen? How does that work? Anyway, it fell off. But I also noticed that because it hasn't got any leather behind the actual ring, it had just started, almost invisible, but it had just started to put a mark on the camera if you have a magnifying glass. So I've gone to the proper Leica strap, put that on, twist on ring again, but we've got some leather behind it, so it's not going to mark the camera, and it's a bit more of a stiff ring than that one, so hopefully it's not going to fall off. It fell off. I was on a dirt come sort of gravel path. We haven't had rain, so it was all very dry and very hard, and it fell off. Oh no, what have I done? And I had the EVF on, and I could see that falling on that and smashing that to pieces. Anyway, it didn't. I don't know where it fell, but I checked the camera over, and I've got back to my office, put my glasses on, and checked every single square millimetre of it, and it hasn't left a single mark. It's absolutely bulletproof. Okay, enough for today. Here's a few photos. Catch you next time. Bye for now.